Pump up some bass.
All right there, so to start with, here's a question. Bass, how low can you go? Pretty low, ideally. When you're in the cinema or in a concert hall, the bass is the really physical, visceral aspect of the sound, isn't it? And when you're trying to replicate the sound of the cinema or the concert hall in your own home, having plenty of bass presence and punch and substance is very important, but it's equally important to have it properly controlled, because just as surely as there is good bass, there is bad bass. IsoAcoustics understands the difference between good bass and bad bass, of course, which is why it's developed this Aperta Sub bespoke subwoofer isolation, because the output of your subwoofer needs to be properly defined and properly controlled if the sound it makes is going to be properly convincing. So what is Aperta Sub? Aperta Sub is subwoofer isolation, because your subwoofer will benefit no end from being properly isolated and having the incredible amount of energy it's producing properly managed. So in the box, first and foremost, is the Aperta Sub frame. Aperta means open in Italian, and it doesn't get much more open than that. So this is a rigid aluminium frame with isolators on top and bottom. The only other stuff that's in the box are these carpet spikes, which go on the bottom of the frame here if you're going to put your subwoofer frame on a nice bit of carpeting. There's some branding on the front of here, and this does indicate which is the front of this frame, which is important. We'll talk about that in a moment. Make the most of this view, because once you've bought an Aperta Sub, you will never see it looking like this again. It's designed to support a subwoofer, so let's put a subwoofer on it. So here's a subwoofer, and a nice one at that. This is a Directional Sub 3, and as you can see, the Aperta Sub is a perfect size for this. But of course, you can use any subwoofer you like. It doesn't have to be this one. The Aperta Sub will support any subwoofer up to 80 pounds, which is getting on for 37 kilos. And so now it's starting to become apparent what Aperta Sub is all about, right? This subwoofer is no longer standing on this surface, it's decoupled from this surface, and that means that the energy it's producing is far better managed. The bass sounds that it produces will be better defined, and they will start and stop with far more control than they would if it was standing straight on the surface. Put this subwoofer directly on the tabletop and it just becomes a sounding board. The low frequencies have no control or discipline, which means they hang around, swamping everything in the mid-range, rattling the pictures on your wall, and travelling into the flat next door as well, which is not going to make you popular. Because we know, don't we, that the bass in our room is brilliant. The bass that's coming from next door is bloody irritating. Of course, the Aperta Sub achieves all of this by having very hefty isolation at the top and the bottom of the frame. And the isolation is directional as well, because that helps manage all of the energy by keeping it on axis. So with a subwoofer like the Directional Sub 3, which fires forwards, you align it with the front of your Aperta Sub and you make sure that the isolators are orientated forwards, and this will manage the on-axis energy of the subwoofer beautifully. And so we'll go out the way we came in, really, by saying that bass is a brilliant and significant part of your home cinema and your home audio experience, but only if it's properly controlled and properly defined. And the way you discover greater definition of the low frequencies that your subwoofer is producing is by putting it on an Aperta Sub. To check if the Aperta Sub is the right model for you, go to calculator.isoacoustics.com.